Hi guys, we're going to start with our first video of the next semester. We're going to talk a little bit today about interactions and levels of organisms. Basically, we're going to start to talk about ecology. And so what ecology is ecology is the study of the relationships among living organisms. Okay, and so obviously we're talking about biology, and so most of what we're talking about is living organisms. Particularly, it's the discussion of those things and how they interact with each other and then how they interact with the environment around them. So far this year, what we've done is we've basically covered, we talked about some chemistry stuff, we talked about cells, and we talked a little bit about organisms. We're going to talk a lot more about that. We basically covered all of this. And so what we're going to talk about today, or at least starting today, is we're going to start to talk about this stuff here that starts with community and goes down to biosphere. We're going to talk about what each of those things are, and then later on in the year, we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about organisms and populations specifically. But we're going to talk a little bit about definitions and set ourselves up so that we can do a little bit more study about ecology today. So a population is basically a group of individual organisms of the same species in the same area. So if we look at all these bison here, they make up a population, okay, in a given area. So we say, well, within this acre or whatever, we have so many bison. They are a given population. They have to be the same species to be in a population. If we count all of the different species, so we count the bison and we count the insects that are on them and we count the plant life and all of that around them, that makes up a community. And a community is a bunch of populations, okay, so different species that are interacting with each other. Okay, and we're going to talk about what those interactions are here in a little bit. An ecosystem takes that community and it takes not just all of the living things in it, but it takes all of the abiotic things in it as well. So what does that mean? What are we talking about here? So biotic factors mean the living. So, I mean, we've got the living things here. So we've got like the plants, okay, animals, we've got bacteria, algae, all of those kinds of things, okay? And then if we jump over here to abiotic factors, then what we have in abiotic factors is we've got things like water and air, and not just material things, but things like temperature. So we've got things like rainfall, things like air and water currents, okay? So all of these things, and there's more things than that. These are all abiotic factors, the minerals that are in the soil, the moisture level, the humidity, all of those types of things. These are all abiotic factors. These are things that affect the ecosystem, but they're not things that are actually living. Okay, so these things are important. And that's what an ecosystem, if we jump back here real quick, an ecosystem contains all those things. It's all the living things and all of the abiotic factors as well. Now, if we take a bunch of ecosystems together, then they make a bigger group called a biome. Okay, so they've got the same climate, similar communities. We're going to talk a lot more about biomes in the next couple of videos. And then if we added up all of the biomes, that would be the biosphere. So all the parts of Earth that sustain life make up the biosphere. Now, that's not necessarily all of the Earth because there are large patches of the ocean that contain very little life. There are areas in the deserts that don't contain very much life, although there's still biomes there, there's still living organisms there. So the portion of the Earth that sustains life, so we're talking about like from the crust level up to a certain point in the atmosphere, that's what sustains life on the Earth. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We're talking about ecosystems and we're sort of talking about communities here as well. I want to talk a little bit about what types of interactions then go on. We talked about we have populations, we have communities of different organisms in an ecosystem. So we've got different kinds of birds. We've got the bison and we've got the prairie dogs and we've got the insects and all of those things. And how do those organisms, how do those populations within a community interact with each other? So there are 5 main ways that that occurs. And so I want to run through those real briefly. I'm not going to go into these in great detail. We'll talk a lot more about them in class. The first way that they can interact is competition. They can compete with each other for the resources in that area. So you've got birds, and those birds might be competing for the same types of resources. They might both be competing for the same type of nuts, or they might both be competing for the same types of seeds or nectar in those particular flowers. They're competing with each other, and generally speaking, as one succeeds, another group is going to fail to a certain degree, or they're not going to succeed as much, at least. That's competition. We can have predation. Now, predation means that they're both not trying to get the same thing. It means that one thing is eating the other. So a cheetah here in this example might be chasing down an antelope. A cheetah is the predator, and the antelope would be the prey. And then we've got three special varieties here that all together are collectively called symbiotic relationships. So we've got parasitism, and that's pretty easy to tell. Is when you've got a parasite, one thing is feeding on another thing. It's not actually necessarily killing off the other thing, but it's usually not doing it a lot of good. It's living on the host and withdrawing resources from it. So a great example of that, of course, is a mosquito is going to withdraw some of our blood. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's killing us, but it's not doing us very much good either, and it could cause some harm. I mean, the more blood that gets drained out, obviously, the more damage it does. So something like a leech, which is also a parasite, can cause some pretty significant damage depending on the size of the organism. Mutualism is going to be an interaction that's going to benefit both of the species, and the best example of this is bees and flowers. Bees are going to help to pollinate plants, and the plants are going to provide nutrients for the bees, and so both of them are benefiting. Basically, I don't know about equally, but they're both benefiting from the relationship. That's mutualism. Commensalism is a relationship in which one of the things is benefiting and it's not really hurting the other thing. And a good example of that are orchids or bromeliads. That are these plants that grow partway up on other trees. And they're mostly doing that so that they can have access to sunlight. This happens a lot in rainforests and stuff where there's a canopy and it's blocking out the sunlight. So these organisms, the orchids say they're not really hurting the tree that they're attached to, but they're definitely not doing it any good. They're not benefiting in any way, but they're not actually causing it any harm. So that's a commensalistic relationship. Remember that all three of these things can be tied up, and we can call those symbiotic relationships, or we can say that all three of these collectively are what we call symbiosis. Okay, we're going to go into a lot more depth in all these things later, and we're going to talk a lot more about the different kinds of biomes and specific ecosystems and habitats and niches in our upcoming videos.